Germany could not win for World War II Part 2. Time to end this. Part 1 was extremely horrible. You know what I find hilarious about Part 1, actually? Many of you didn't really bother to watch what I have to say. Instead, what many of you did is you disliked and then you left. I'm just gonna put a quick disclaimer. If you're not willing to watch at least half of this video, just leave right now, okay? And don't get me wrong, like, dislikes are good for me because they give me engagement. It doesn't really matter if you get likes or dislikes, but it just if you're not going to watch at least half of this video, just leave. There's no point in staying around if you're just gonna watch for like a minute and then leave.
Just hoping better sources will be used in the future. However, our intel has picked up reports of continued resistance in the comment sections. Mentions of Dunkirk and who not to invade.
Oh my god, skip this.
This video is brought to you by Dashlane. Stay secure online and never forget a password again. More on that later. So you may recall around 6 months ago, I made a video about how due to Germany's lacking in the population, industrial, and raw materials sectors, they could not have pulled out a victory in the war they started in 1939. And it sorta got out of hand.
I think we should read the comments.
The other day, as I was reading the comment section there, I found that, along with some people agreeing with me, there were a lot of dissenting opinions of yet more ways that people thought the final victory could be achieved. And I am here today to respond to them, and also probably clear up what I meant at the end of the last video talking about limited use of alternative history. Here are a few more ways Germany could not have won World War II. One thing I have seen brought up a few times is that if Hitler had not let the
Demonetized.
British Expeditionary Force get away at Dunkirk, that later the troops could not be used during Operation Overlord and thus no Western Front, with the implication that the German troops could have been sent east to stop the Soviets. This, however, has two problems. Firstly, the BEF was not simply allowed to leave France as this narrative suggests. In Mein Kampf, Hitler does speak highly of the British at times and suggests
Again, I'm pretty sure, I don't know how true this was, but I'm pretty sure Mustache Man literally says, if I knew I was going to become the leader of Germany, I would not have wrote Mein Kampf. Also, I mean, books are good to reference, but guys, people's opinions can change, like, well after they wrote a book. Or perception. So I know that's a big problem that a lot of people in the historical community have, is they'll reference like a book or something a lot, but they don't really acknowledge that, you know, hey, maybe this person's way of thinking can change. Like,
that they could be a potential ally, but this is clearly without a strong grasp of British culture and political policy, and was always discussed with Germany being above Britain and having them be administrators of the Reich, but only if they could shake their, quote, Jewish influence. Furthermore, he realized that Britain was against his intentions in the East and would become a barrier there. All this being said, by the time of the invasion of France, Britain was definitely an enemy, and Hitler was doing them no favors. So then why Dunkirk? Well, this was an operational failing, not a peaceful gesture. On May 15th, 1940, the Germans broke through the French 2nd and 9th armies and steamed ahead night and day, thanks in part to some tablet boys, towards the coast. Although these gains were good for the Germans, the mechanized forces were quickly running out of supplies and were leaving their flanks exposed, which opened them to being cut off, the result of which could cause ruin for the German plans. It is at this point a nervous Hitler, being counseled by Generals von Kluge and von Rundstedt, gave a halt order to secure the flanks and allow the exhausted panzer divisions to refit. Check out this video by Mark Gurges for more. Upon the halt, our favorite drug-addled flyboy Goering promised the Luftwaffe could destroy the British at Dunkirk, and although he failed, I would hardly call the actions of the Luftwaffe just letting the British go. With thousands being killed, over 200 ships being sunk, over 100 planes shot down, and the loss of all the BEF's equipment, Hitler even realized that the halt was an error and resumed the attack while the evacuation was underway.
200 ships sunk. You gotta look into more of this, actually. 200 ships sunk. What type of ships were they? Gotta look into more of that.
and it was only successful due to the brave French soldiers that held out until it was complete. But even
That
if
is
you had
true.
let them go, there are still more problems asserting that this means a German victory in the war. Britain had to rearm all the soldiers evacuated, which is a huge loss and took some time. This force, when returned to England, was not in any way ready to turn around and invade France.
Yep,
Although
that
these
is true.
reserves were good to have if Germany decided to invade, but they were not in fighting condition for a long time. But most importantly, Britain is not the only nation present at D-Day. A combined landing force of American, British, and Canadian forces, along with smaller groups from other countries, landed and fought on the Western Front. Although the troop loss of Dunkirk had failed,
Yeah, America more or less carried D-Day. I mean, don't get me wrong. The British and the Commonwealth did their part, but it was spearheaded by the Americans. So
may have limited Britain's number of troops, the United States, having only mobilized about 9% of its population in the very realistically filled in the gaps as it did in reality with the British equipment losses. But all of this still doesn't take into account where the real
yeah, that's what I said before in my comments. Actually, the moment Germany gets America involved in World War II, that's it. It's over. Although I do believe Germany could have won before America got involved. But again, I am keeping a special video for that.
real war is being fought in the East. The German army will be decidedly on its back foot after Kursk, and the Soviets have massive offensives planned in 1944 regardless of what the Western Allies do. Would the defeat of Germany have taken longer without the Western Front opening? Of course it would. But by 1944, the Soviets have a decisive upper hand and will push the Germans back to Berlin. So to say the
Depends on what part of 1944. A, because it's easier to defend. B, 1944, pre-Bagration, the Soviets were actually asking for the West to open up a front in the West to make Germany divert troops, because many people don't know this, but they think that after Stalingrad, when the German forces were retreating and the German forces were broken, which is partially true. That did happen after Stalingrad. However, many people criticize the Soviets for this. Stalingrad was supposed to be a lot worse. Like, the entire Caucasus group was supposed to be cut off, but they escaped. Again, part of this was due to the fact that, well, the Germans inside of Stalingrad didn't surrender. So a lot of people kind of like gloss over that. That's another reason why the dictator of Germany said that the troops at Stalingrad couldn't surrender, because they were the army group in the Caucasus had to escape, which it did successfully. Now, Army Group South was on the back end for the rest of the war. That is true. However, the German army actually, until Operation Bagration, the worst military disaster in German history, happened, they were actually retreating intact, mostly intact. In fact, before Bagration happened, around what now Belarus and Estonia, the Germans in Army Groups North and Army Group Center were actually holding the Soviets off for a while. Again, Army Group South being the one that was heavily, just constantly being, just beaten. Obviously, they were the ones lacking the most. But the other two army groups were holding so well before Bagration happened. If you check the map, pre-Bagration, what the front lines looked like, they actually gave the nickname around Belarusia, where Army Group was at the time. They gave the nickname the Belarusian Balcony, because Army Group Center was literally like beating back like every single Soviet attack at that point. And they up in Estonia by Narvik, I think it was Narvik, due to the geographic positions. The Soviets also really could not push the Germans back. Now, the reason this is why, again, a lot of people just really gloss over the fact that Stalin was literally asking the Allies, hey, I wouldn't even say asking, low-key, like begging the Allies for a second front to take the pressure off for the Eastern Front. Now, the Soviets, how did they pull off Bagration despite the fact that the Germans were relatively holding at that point? Well, because again, intelligence failure. The Soviets deceived the Germans, and the Germans fell for it. And because of that, the dictator of Germany, he put his reserves in South, thinking that the Soviets naturally would press their advantage. Because remember, the Southern Army Group South was just really just beaten up at that point. So the dictator of Germany expected the Soviets to just keep pushing in the South. So he put his last operational reserves at the time in that, because he thought that the Soviets would try and take out Germany's oil supply in Romania and make the Balkans switch sides on Germany. Not bad thinking, but again, Soviet deception and this genius planning. Just that's how Germany had Bagration happen to them. In fact, Bagration was so severe that it was 2 Stalingrads, basically, in terms of casualties. So, before Bagration, I would make an inference and say that you could argue that Germany probably could have like held the Soviets, or just made the Soviets get a lot of casualties. Because, guys, you need to remember, right? Up until the Battle of Berlin, up until the very end that the Soviets were fighting, the Soviets were taking more casualties than the Germans. The only reason why the Germans, it didn't really affect the Germans as much as it should, not the Germans, the reason why it didn't affect the Soviets as much as it should have in our timeline is because A, the Western Allies had created a second front, so Germany had to split their forces up even more. B, the Germans were already, due to their failure in intelligence and logistics, they were already defeated in Russia, right? But I would say more or less, due to their failure to detect Operation Bagration, even though the Soviets were taking much more casualties, the Soviets should just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going, right? So the Soviets were taking a lot more casualties, and I do believe that. Now, I'm just saying, somehow, if the Germans had realized what the Soviets were planning, I don't think the Germans could have really detected Operation Bagration. I don't really think so. Because honestly, what the Soviets did was a masterpiece in deceiving the Germans. But I do believe the Soviets couldn't pull off Bagration. They would have been worn down, that even if they had pushed the Germans back, it wouldn't really be so quick like it was in our timeline. Even if they pushed the Germans all the way back into Berlin, I don't know how they would do that with all those Germany, all those reserves. I just don't really believe that the Soviets could push all the way to Berlin. Again, I'm just saying, if Operation Bagration failed, there's absolutely zero ways the Soviets could have pushed Berlin. Not with Army Group Center intact and Army Group North intact. No way. The Soviets were taking horrendous casualties. Okay, even when the Germans were on their back foot. Now imagine if the Germans weren't on their back foot. Yeah, definitely not. Again, remember, Stalin was begging the Allies to open up the Western Front. That is true. Okay, let's continue.
The war could have been shifted if the British had 300,000 fewer troops ignores the reality of what the Germans were truly up against by 1944.
Every industry needs.
This is another one I saw a lot. Just don't invade the Soviet Union, or just don't declare war on the United States. And although these comments are puzzling on the surface, as removing a major combatant redefines what the war is and you are now describing how to win a smaller conflict, there are reasons this doesn't work that are all to do with character motivation and why these things were going to happen unless you fundamentally change who the Germans and Hitler were, and then stray into fiction. Let's first start with the Soviet Union. If you read Mein Kampf, don't do it, it's not a very good book, or listen to a lot of Hitler's speeches, both in public and in private, he fixates on this idea of Judeo-Bolshevism, which is a rather outdated term that grew out of the idea of a Jewish conspiracy that had created communism, and the two were the biggest evils facing the Aryan nation. There's a whole rabbit hole to go down here with multiple theorists and their ideas, but I'm not going to go into it here. But that's the basic idea, and Hitler subscribed to it. And the result of this is Hitler's main goal being to destroy the Soviet Union and become the savior of the Aryan people in his eyes, and in the process, wiping out millions of subhuman Slavs and resettle the land with Germans. Hitler saw this as his destiny, meaning he was going to do it at some point, and that this fictitious Hitler that would win World War II by not invading the East is just that, fiction. He ceases becoming the Hitler that we know and that existed, and now we're talking about a made-up story. Now, as to why the Soviet Union was invaded when it was, comes down to two things: resources and, frankly, paranoia. Germany, as I outlined in my previous video on this, spent a lot of the war with fairly limited oil resources, and knew that it couldn't support this attack any later than June of 41, with all the fuel that the battle over Britain was consuming. And even the trade with the Soviet Union would not make up for this deficit. So the High Command felt they had to go in when they did, before the army would not be able to move as they needed to finish the
trade the Soviets were not making enough. Now that's the first time I've heard anyone say that. Because whenever I hear people talking about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, I always hear people say that, well, the Germans didn't have oil problems because they were trading with the Soviets up until that point.
Campaign by September.
That's the first time I've heard this.
The Soviet Union would collapse in on itself under the weight of the German attack. And I'll point you to David Stahill again for more information on that. The other aspect was, as I said, paranoia. I've often seen this assertion stated in a different way of, don't break the alliance with the Soviet Union, although I wouldn't even frame the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact as an alliance in the way you think of with the Axis and Allies. The treaty was much more in the vein of, you don't get in our way, we won't get in your way, let's trade some stuff. And it was very uneasy at many points before and during its existence.
I don't get this logic of people in the history community. You know what? Now, I'm gonna say that for a different video. I'm gonna say that for my why Operation Sea Lion was actually possible video.
Becoming most volatile during combat between
I'm not going to say that here.
soldiers during the Poland campaign, after the Germans overran the territory that was designated as theirs and moved into territory promised to the Soviets that actually contained oil fields, making it not very subtle what the Germans were trying to do. Both Stalin and Hitler knew that some form of war was coming, just not when and who would start it, but going out of their way for the most part to not provoke it. And they didn't trust each other whatsoever. Now, I'm not implying any kind of Suvorov preventative war type thing. The Soviet Union was refitting and probably wouldn't be ready for a large war until at least mid-1942, but with these two ideologically opposing powers taking territory so quickly right next to each other, it was something that was bound to happen as soon as one of them felt they were in a position to make the first move. By 1941, the Germans felt they were, and they took the opportunity. For more on this, and the German-Soviet clashings in Poland, I'll point you towards Stephen Kotkin's second book in his Stalin series, or this video of him talking about it. The declaration of war on the US is a bit more tricky, especially given that Hitler was aware of the industrial capacity of the nation. However, he saw the US as very internally focused, and figured that it would take them much longer to mobilize than it did. Hitler always planned for war with the United States, as outlined in his second book, written but not published, in 1928, but wanted to put it off until he was ready, often skipping on details about how it would be done. He began to assume that, due to some anti-German sentiments from Roosevelt, the Americans would declare war in 1942, coming to the aid of the Allies like they did in World War I. Piggybacking off the previous statements about the Soviets, he figured he could end the war in the East and turn and fight the West. This feeling ended, though, as the Soviet campaign continued to drag on and 1942 loomed. The German Navy had been asking for war with the United States for some time, as Hitler had been holding them back to not provoke them, knowing that going against the US Navy, the Kriegsmarine would come up lacking. Hitler's solution to this was Japan, which had a large navy that he thought could tie up the Americans until he was done in Russia, then turn westward and save his plan. He constantly reassured the Japanese that Germany would throw in with them if they expanded their territory south into US-held islands. This was among many attempts to get Germany and Japan to fight the same enemy, which also included trying to get Japan to invade the Soviet Union from the east in June. Although Japan kept Hitler in the dark as to when they were going to attack, Hitler was very pleased when they did and immediately lifted all restrictions on his navy to attack US ships, and later declared war a few days later after his foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, said, "A great power does not allow itself to be declared war upon, it declares war on others." Now this
Germany and the US were basically fighting a undeclared war at that point in the Atlantic. Like, literally, like, if you actually, like, go, like, dig deeper into that, it was even like, Mustache Man did the wrong mistake. Like, the US is literally attacking German subs with their destroyers, if they could. If you see the reason why the dictator of Germany declared war, this is actually his official reason for going to war with Germany. In a nutshell, it was summarized as well, they're attacking us, even though we're not really trying to attack them, and we're telling them to not trade with Britain because if you trade with a belligerent partner, then that makes you what the hell is that word I'm looking for? It makes you susceptible to attack. They're still doing it, so that's a violation of international treaty. Which, I mean, if you're a neutral country and you literally have destroyers attacking submarines, well, yeah, that's blatant violation of international treaty. I know some people are gonna go in my comments and say, "Oh, but they were escorts." Again, many times the Germans warned them to not trade with Britain. Like, dude, if you're going to trade with a belligerent partner that is fighting someone else, like, this is common sense. Like, there's gonna be repercussions that comes with that. Okay, like I really hope I do not see anyone in my comments talking about some but the trade or they were escorting. Like, why would you trade with someone at war? Why would you put yourself at that risk in the first place?
This decision may have been flawed with the hindsight of putting too much faith in the Japanese Navy and underestimating the US's ability to fight on two fronts and mobilize so quickly, but knowing that Hitler did plan to fight the US way back in the 20s, the timing may be bad given what we know now, but it was not something that he was just not going to do, in the same way he was not.
Again, all the way back in the 20s, sure, but you know, like, dude, times change and people's opinions can change. Like, yeah, I'm not saying that books are completely wrong. I'm just saying you just need to, like, pay attention to their personality as time goes on and see, like, okay, how is your logic changing? How's your logic shifting? Because, well, the dictator knew that, like, making war with the U.S. was always a bad idea. It's not like he didn't even know that. In fact, it wasn't even him who wanted to do it. It was the Kriegsmarine that convinced him to make war with the U.S. So
going to just opt out of invading the Soviet Union.
now, I do agree that, like, I do agree that there's no way that the dictator of Germany couldn't avoid war with the U.S. one way or another, no matter how late it was. Like, nah, I don't know. I do agree that he would have make war with you, especially with the Kriegsmarine begging him to. Like, I do agree with that though. So just trying to just completely ignore the U.S. I don't know. Nah.
This is the one that I see the most. Take the British out before you turn east. As if it was that simple. The Germans tried this. First by attempting to bomb the British into submission, which didn't work, and second by planning the invasion of the British home island in an operation named Sea Lion. This was going to be the amphibious assault that would take Britain out of the war, and plans were drawn up and early preparations were made. But before going through with it, the Germans themselves realized this wasn't going to work and cancelled it. The short answer for why is the Royal Navy and the inability of the Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe to control the channel. The German Navy would be unable to keep the channel clear of British warships to enable troops and supplies to reach the British coast unless the army's landing was on a very narrow front, resulting in less water needing to be covered. Knowing the coast was going to be heavily defended, the army rejected this plan as they would need a wide landing front so they were not just feeding men into a meat grinder. In short, the Germans did not have the material to carry out a successful landing without it either bogging down and being cut off on the ground or being simply sunk on the way to its destination. In the
what was the guy? I forgot his name. Was he the admiral at the time? Someone in the British. I'm pretty sure it was the admiral at the time. Damn, I forgot what his name was. But he did admit that like the whole coast is wide open. What was his name? if I said his name, like you would know who I'm talking about. But he literally said like the coast is wide open, and at least Germany could have landed at least 200,000 troops. Now, here's the thing: when it comes to Sea Lion, everyone agrees that Germany could have landed troops there. Where people start to not agree is how Germany was going to keep those troops supplied. Because again, everyone would just say that, oh, the Royal Navy would come and destroy everything, yada, yada, yada. Now, that's where I disagree. Okay? I believe, and again, I'm not going to say too much details here because I'm going to go make a whole video demonstrating this. Now, I've been saying that, oh, I'm going to make this video again because researching, script writing, and making a video engaging, because most of you people have such low attention spans, and you people, quite frankly, you only want to hear what you want to hear, and every time I say something that you don't want to hear, you press dislike and then you stop watching instead of actually listening. So, yeah, where I disagree is that the Royal Navy was as much of a threat as most people would think. That's where I disagree. I'm going to explain why here, but I disagree with that.
70s, the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst wargamed the scenario with conditions favorable to the Germans and came up with the operation being a total failure. Some commenters have gone as far as to suggest using paratroopers to take the British down, but I think you need to only look as far as Crete and Arnhem to see how badly an unsupported airborne operation can go. The Germans would still have to land by sea to resupply them and get relief troops on the ground, and the Royal Navy was too large an obstacle to allow this to happen, even by the Germans' own admission.
That's the problem. That's the problem here. That, you see, he doesn't like go into much details. And I see everyone, they say this, they're always saying, oh, the Royal Navy, haha, boom, there, that's why I see. They don't go into much details at all. But again, I'm going to save those details for why my Operation Sea Lion was possible video, okay? And I know it's going to ruffle so many feathers, okay? Because, I mean, that's a problem that the historical community has. Actually, that's a problem everywhere, frankly speaking. You don't say what people want to hear, they get angry at you and they don't want to hear you up. But I really don't care. Many times I say something that you people don't want to hear and you get angry at me and I don't really care. I still say it anyways. But when it's with the case of Sea Lion, this is actually going to be much more fun. Okay, this is actually going to be much more fun. Usually, I don't really like to go into much details because I don't want to drag on my videos for too long. But in this case, I will go into like flat out details on why I believe Sea Lion was actually possible. Anyways, is it going to say anything important?
One particular comment out of all of them really stood out to me. It began with, if the Nazis weren't Nazis, they would have won. And I think this really speaks to the core of my point. Alternative history is fun. It makes for good hoi 4 games, but when really talking about it seriously, it's really hard to come by any academic conclusions outside of a few days of speculation, because you begin building assumption on assumption on assumption, and before you know it, you have changed the motivations and decision-making patterns of everybody you're talking about, and you are then just writing fan fiction.
This is your brain. This is your brain on
alternative history.
Would Germany have won World War II if the Nazis weren't in power? Maybe, but it's also equally likely they wouldn't have started the war, or joined the Allies, or anything else. If there's no basis in reality,
Germany lost the war because logistics issues and intelligence failure, all of which could have been easily fixed. It has nothing to do with the current government at the time.
To do with the people you are talking about in your assumption.
Oh, and fuel shortages as well.
What's the point? Germany decided to start a war that within a little over 2 years would see them taking on 3 superpowers at once, with the resources of most of the world behind them. Add in strategic mistakes and intelligence failures, it paints a very grim picture from the start, regardless of decisions made after the
Well, at least it talks about the intelligence failure because nobody talks about that whatsoever.
fact.
But he like completely downplays it. So,
Intelligence failures, don't let your private information go the way of the German armies. There are plenty
bro, dude, this guy legit just only talk about intelligence failure just for a sponsor. Okay, I'm done here. Look, man, You made it all the way this far into the video. If you like what I have to say, make sure you go and subscribe. If you disagree with what I say, I don't really care. Go like the video. Thank you for watching this video. And stick around for my sea lion video, because there's gonna be a lot of good points there. I'm done.